The message that changed everything arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I was sitting alone in my kitchen, wrapped in my late husband's old navy cardigan, half watching a rerun of a game show and half thinking about whether I should finally replace the coffee maker that had been sputtering for months. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. At first, I almost ignored it. Most people don't text a 69-year-old widow that late unless it's a scam or a wrong number. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw my granddaughter Sophie's name. What caught my attention wasn't the message itself. It was the image attached to it. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Something about it felt wrong. The screenshot showed a group chat. At the top was a title I had never seen before. Plan for Grandma. I stared at those 3 words. Plan. For. Grandma. My hands went cold. Beneath the title were dozens of messages. Most of them were cut off by the screenshot, but one remained visible near the bottom. Don't tell her until after Thanksgiving. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. Outside my window, the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. Sophie followed the screenshot with a single message. Sorry, Grandma. I didn't mean to send that. A few seconds later, the image disappeared. She had unsent it. But not before I had seen it. Not before those words had lodged themselves in my mind like a splinter. I typed back immediately. What is this? No answer. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. Then 30. Nothing. Eventually, I called. It went straight to voicemail. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a surprise party. Maybe they were planning a family trip. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. But the more I tried to convince myself, the less convincing those explanations sounded. Over the next hour, I replayed every recent conversation I'd had with my family. Ethan had seemed distracted during our Sunday phone call. Ashley had canceled lunch twice in the past month. Even Sophie had been unusually quiet the last time she visited. Little moments I had brushed aside suddenly felt different. I set my phone face down and tried to sleep. That was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that group chat title. Plan for Grandma. Around 2 in the morning, I walked downstairs and made myself a cup of tea. The mug trembled slightly in my hands. 4 years had passed since my husband Robert died. In those 4 years, I had worked hard to believe that family was still family. That people stayed connected even when life became busy. That being left out occasionally was simply part of getting older. But sitting alone at my kitchen table that night, watching steam rise from my tea, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Unease. Deep, persistent unease. Because whatever that group chat was, it had never been meant for my eyes. And somehow, I knew that if I looked closely enough, I was going to find something I wished I had never seen. The next morning, I woke up after maybe 2 hours of sleep. The gray November sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, and for a few seconds I forgot about the screenshot. Then I saw my phone on the nightstand and remembered everything. I reached for it immediately. No new messages. No explanation from Sophie. Nothing from Ethan. Nothing from Ashley. The silence felt heavier than any answer could have. I moved through my morning routine slowly. I brewed coffee, fed the birds outside my kitchen window, and watered the small collection of plants I had kept alive since Robert passed away. 4 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Other times it felt like an entirely different lifetime. Robert had always been the center of our family. He remembered birthdays without reminders. He called people just to ask how they were doing. He made everyone feel important. After he died, I told myself that families changed. People got busy. Children grew up. Grandchildren had school, sports, jobs, and their own lives. I never wanted to become the kind of mother who complained about not getting enough attention. So whenever something hurt, I found an excuse for it. When Ethan forgot my birthday lunch, 2 years ago, I told myself work must have been stressful. When Ashley canceled Christmas Eve dinner at the last minute, I convinced myself she was overwhelmed. When family photos appeared online from events I had never heard about, I assumed there had been some misunderstanding. Looking back, I realized how often I had chosen the explanation that protected everyone except me. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store. The familiar routine usually settled my mind, but not that day. Everywhere I looked, memories followed me. Ethan loved the bakery section when he was a boy. Sophie used to beg me for chocolate chip cookies every time we shopped together. I had spent decades building my life around family. Even after becoming a widow, that had not changed. Every Sunday I cooked enough food for 6 people, even when I knew I would probably eat alone. It was a habit I could never quite break. That afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old family photos. There we were at Sophie's 10th birthday party. There was Ethan teaching his daughter how to ride a bicycle. There was Ashley smiling beside everyone during a summer barbecue. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing looked broken. Yet I could not stop thinking about the gap between those smiling pictures and the words I had seen the night before. Planned for Grandma. The phrase echoed in my head. By early evening, I finally received a text from Sophie. My heart jumped when I saw her name. The message was short. Too short. Sorry about last night. It was a mistake. That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. No mention of the screenshot itself. I stared at the message for several minutes. Then I typed a simple reply. I understand. It was not true. I did not understand anything. But for the first time, I stopped trying to explain away the feeling growing inside me. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And whatever my family was hiding, it had been hidden for much longer than a single night. 3 days later, Ethan called and invited me to dinner. Under normal circumstances, I would have been happy. Lately, every invitation from family felt precious. That evening, I drove 20 minutes across town to their house, carrying a peach cobbler I had baked that afternoon. The air was cold, and the trees along the street had already lost most of their leaves. Through the front window, I could see warm lights and hear laughter before I even reached the door. Ashley greeted me with her usual bright smile. Sophie hugged me quickly before disappearing upstairs. Ethan took the cobbler from my hands and thanked me. Everything looked normal. Too normal. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Ethan talked about work. Ashley talked about a fundraiser she was helping organize. Sophie barely spoke at all. I noticed her looking down at her plate more than once. Every now and then, she would glance at me and then quickly look away. The behavior reminded me of a child carrying a secret. I tried to ignore it. Halfway through the meal, Ashley mentioned a weekend trip to a lake resort. She described the hiking trails, the restaurants, and a beautiful view of the water from their cabin. Ethan nodded and added details about a fishing dock nearby. I listened politely, waiting for context. Eventually I realized there was none. They were discussing a family vacation. A family vacation that had already happened. I had never heard about it. Nobody had invited me. Nobody had even mentioned it before that moment. Ashley stopped suddenly and smiled. "Oh, I thought you knew about that trip." The words landed softly, but something about them felt rehearsed. I smiled back. "No, I must have missed it." Ethan immediately changed the subject. Too quickly. The conversation moved on, but my attention did not. Later, while Ashley was clearing dishes and Ethan stepped outside to answer a call, I found myself standing near the hallway wall where family photos were displayed. There were dozens of pictures. Birthdays. Graduations. Holiday dinners. Then I noticed a frame near the end of the row. It showed the lake resort Ashley had just described. Everyone was there. Ethan. Ashley. Sophie. Even Ashley's parents. They stood smiling beside the water under a bright summer sky. I stared at the image for several seconds. The trip had happened 4 months ago. 4 months. Not once during that time had anyone mentioned it to me. Grandma? Sophie's voice startled me. She was standing behind me. I pointed gently toward the photo. Looks like everyone had fun. Her face changed instantly. The color seemed to drain from it. Yes, she said quietly. I guess so. Before I could say anything else, Ashley appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee cups. Sophie's expression vanished as quickly as it had appeared. On my drive home that night, I kept thinking about the photograph. One forgotten invitation could be an accident. Two could be bad timing. But after years of similar moments, a pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether the screenshot had not revealed a new problem at all. Maybe it had revealed one that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The following week, I stopped looking for explanations and started looking for memories. It was surprising how many appeared once I allowed myself to see them honestly. I spent an afternoon sorting old photographs and paperwork in the spare bedroom that had slowly become a storage room after Robert passed away. Dust floated through the sunlight coming from the small window, and every box seemed to contain another reminder of a life that had once felt secure. At first, I thought I was simply organizing. Instead, I found myself building a timeline. There was Sophie's middle school awards ceremony 3 years earlier. I remembered learning about it from a social media post after it had already happened. Ashley had apologized and said the school changed the schedule at the last minute. Then there was Ethan's promotion celebration. I had sent him a congratulatory card because I was told the dinner had been cancelled. 2 days later, photos appeared online showing a crowded restaurant full of family and friends. I remembered feeling hurt for an hour before convincing myself it was not worth dwelling on. One memory led to another. A neighborhood barbecue I had never heard about. A 4th of July gathering that supposedly became too crowded. A weekend cabin trip that nobody mentioned until months later. Every event came with an explanation. Every explanation sounded reasonable when viewed alone. Together, they told a different story. I pulled out an old notebook and began writing dates. The more I wrote, the quieter the room became. By the time I finished, almost 6 pages were filled with occasions I had missed. Not because I was unavailable. Not because I declined. Because nobody told me. The realization sat heavily in my chest. For years I had blamed circumstances. Busy schedules. Miscommunication. Modern life. Anything except the possibility that someone was making deliberate choices. Then I noticed something else. Ashley's name appeared in nearly every memory. She was the one who sent updates. She was the one who explained changes in plans. She was the one who reassured me that everyone was thinking of me. I could still hear her voice. Warm. Polite. Concerned. Somehow that made the memories feel worse. If she had been openly rude, I would have recognized the problem years ago. Instead, everything had been wrapped in kindness. That evening, I sat in my living room with the notebook resting on my lap. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted past the windows. My phone remained silent. No calls. No messages. No invitations. I thought about the family photographs hanging above the fireplace. Smiling faces frozen in time. Looking at them now felt strange. Not because the smiles were fake. Because I no longer knew what existed outside the frame. Around 9 o'clock, my phone lit up with a new notification. For a brief moment, I hoped it was Sophie. Instead, it was Ashley. The message seemed ordinary. Just checking on you. Hope you are doing well. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I looked at the notebook beside me. 6 pages of forgotten invitations. 6 pages of explanations. 6 pages of moments that no longer looked accidental. For the first time, I did not feel confused. I felt certain. Whatever was happening had been happening for years. I just had not seen the pattern until now. 2 days later, the first real crack appeared. It happened by accident, or at least that is what I believed at the time. I was paying a utility bill online when an email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. Normally, I ignored most notifications, but this one caught my attention because it came from Sophie's school district. The subject line mentioned a student recognition ceremony. I almost deleted it, assuming it had been sent to the wrong person. Then I noticed the date. The ceremony had taken place 3 months earlier. Confused, I opened the email. According to the message, I had been listed as one of Sophie's approved family contacts for years. The school had regularly sent updates about academic awards, performances, parent events, and special ceremonies. My eyes moved slowly across the screen. There were dozens of messages in the email archive. Dozens. I searched my inbox. Nothing. Not one of them had ever reached me. At first, I assumed there had been a technical problem. Then I noticed something else. Every notification had been automatically forwarded to another email address before disappearing from my account. I stared at the address for several seconds. It belonged to Ashley. My pulse quickened. I checked another message. The same thing. Then another. And another. Every school update intended for me had been redirected. Some had been sent 4 years ago. Others were more recent. I sat motionless at my desk. Suddenly, memories I had struggled to understand began fitting together. Sophie's theater performance. Her academic banquet. Her volunteer award ceremony. Events I thought I had somehow forgotten or misunderstood. Events where I had felt embarrassed for not showing up. I had blamed myself every single time. That afternoon, I drove to the public library because I needed somewhere quiet to think. I found a table near the back and opened my notebook. For the next hour, I compared dates from the school emails with dates from my list of missed family events. The overlap was impossible to ignore. Every major milestone in Sophie's life had occurred without me. Not because I chose not to attend. Because I never knew they existed. The realization hurt in a way I had not expected. Missing a vacation was one thing. Missing years of a grandchild's life was something entirely different. Around 4 o'clock, my phone vibrated. It was Sophie. Just seeing her name made my heart race. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded nervous. She asked how I was doing. We spoke about ordinary things for a few minutes. The weather. School. Thanksgiving plans? Then there was a pause. A long one. Finally, she said something that made me grip the edge of the table. Grandma, have you ever felt like somebody was making decisions for you without asking? I did not answer right away. The library suddenly felt very still. Why would you ask that? I said quietly. Another pause followed. Then she whispered, because I think that has been happening for a long time. Before I could ask another question, she said she had to go. The call ended. I stared at the dark screen in my hand. For the first time since seeing that screenshot, I no longer felt like I was chasing a mystery. I felt like someone on the inside was trying to show me the door. After that phone call, I stopped waiting for answers to arrive on their own. If Sophie was trying to tell me something, I needed to pay attention. The next few days passed quietly, but I noticed a change in myself. For years I had been looking at my family through the lens of trust. Now I was looking through the lens of observation. The difference was startling. Small details that once seemed harmless suddenly stood out. Ashley began texting more often than usual. Every message was cheerful. Every message felt carefully constructed. One morning she sent me a photograph of a pumpkin pie cooling on her kitchen counter. Another day she asked whether I needed help carrying holiday decorations down from the attic. The kindness should have reassured me. Instead, it made me uneasy. It felt less like affection and more like management. On Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a local real estate office. The receptionist sounded embarrassed. She apologized for missing me during a recent appointment and asked whether I wanted to reschedule. I almost told her she had the wrong number. Then she mentioned my address. My heart skipped. What appointment? I asked. There was a brief silence. The receptionist explained that someone had requested a preliminary property evaluation several weeks earlier. According to their records, the homeowner had expressed interest in discussing future housing options. I gripped the phone tighter. I had never contacted them. I had never requested anything. The receptionist quickly apologized and promised to investigate. After the call ended, I sat motionless in my living room. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches of the maple tree in my front yard. Inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. A property evaluation. Future housing options. The phrases echoed through my mind. They reminded me of something. Suddenly I remembered the screenshot. The message about Thanksgiving. The strange group name. The growing pattern of decisions being made without my knowledge. That evening, I searched through old emails and paperwork again. This time I was looking for anything related to my house. Most of what I found was ordinary. Utility bills. Insurance documents. Maintenance records. Then I discovered something unusual. 3 months earlier, a visitor had signed into my neighborhood association database requesting information about property boundaries. The contact number listed on the request belonged to Ashley. I stared at the screen. Once could be coincidence. Twice was not. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was Sophie. This time she did not call. She sent a photograph. The image showed part of a conversation. Only a few lines were visible. Someone had written, "We need to have everything ready before she starts asking questions." Another message followed beneath it. "The house is the biggest obstacle." My chest tightened. Before I could respond, another message arrived from Sophie. Just 4 words. "Please be careful, Grandma." I read them again and again. Not because they frightened me. Because they confirmed something I had been resisting. Whatever was happening was larger than hurt feelings, forgotten invitations, or missed family events. There was a plan taking shape behind closed doors. And for the first time, I believed my granddaughter was afraid of it too. That night I barely slept. Sophie's warning stayed with me long after I turned off the lights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages. The house is the biggest obstacle. Please be careful, Grandma. By morning, the unease had settled into something colder. Determination. For years, I had been reacting to information after it appeared. Now I wanted to understand where it was coming from. The following afternoon, I accepted an invitation to lunch from Ashley. The message arrived unexpectedly. She suggested a small cafe downtown that she knew I liked. Under normal circumstances, I would have appreciated the gesture. Instead, I found myself wondering why she suddenly seemed so interested in spending time together. The cafe was busy when I arrived. Holiday decorations hung in the windows, and soft music played through hidden speakers. Ashley greeted me warmly and ordered coffee before I even sat down. She smiled often. Asked about my health. Asked whether I was staying active. Asked whether I ever felt lonely in such a large house. That question caught my attention. I answered carefully. Not really. I have plenty to keep me busy. Ashley nodded, stirring cream into her coffee. Still, maintaining a property by yourself must be exhausting. There it was. A simple sentence. Innocent on the surface. Yet it felt connected to everything else. The property evaluation. The messages. The concern that always seemed focused on where I lived rather than how I felt. I changed the subject and watched her expression. For a brief moment, disappointment flickered across her face before the smile returned. After lunch, I drove home feeling more certain than ever that I was being guided toward a conclusion I had never chosen. Later that evening, Sophie sent another message. This time it contained a screenshot of a folder name. Nothing more. Just a title. Future Care Options. I stared at the words. At first, I felt almost relieved. Maybe this was what everything had been about. Maybe they were discussing retirement communities or assisted living facilities. Families had those conversations all the time. Perhaps the situation was uncomfortable but not sinister. Then I noticed the date beneath the folder. It had been created nearly 2 years earlier. 2 years. Long before anyone had ever asked whether I needed help. Long before anyone had expressed concern about my independence. Long before there was any reason to discuss future care at all. The realization unsettled me. They had been planning something for a very long time. As I sat in my living room that evening, another memory surfaced. About 18 months earlier, Ethan had encouraged me to sign several documents related to emergency contacts and medical preferences. He said it was just a precaution. Responsible planning. At the time, I had appreciated his concern. Now I found myself wondering how many other conversations I had accepted without question. How many decisions had been framed as help when they were actually preparation. Outside, snow began falling steadily across the neighborhood. The streetlights cast pale circles onto the quiet road. Inside, I opened my notebook and added another page. At the top, I wrote 2 words. Future care. Then I began listing everything I knew. By the time I finished, one thing had become painfully clear. Whatever story my family was telling about me behind closed doors, it had started long before I ever saw that first screenshot. The breakthrough came from a place I never expected. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I received a call from the real estate office again. This time the manager personally apologized for the confusion surrounding my property. During the conversation, she mentioned something that made my heart stop. According to their records, a representative had already toured portions of my home several months earlier. I nearly dropped the phone. "That is impossible," I said. "No one has toured my house." There was a pause. Then she carefully explained that the visit had been arranged through a family contact who claimed to be helping coordinate long-term planning. When she offered to email the documentation, I agreed immediately. 20 minutes later, the files arrived. I opened them at my kitchen table. The first few pages contained routine information. Estimated value. Property details. Neighborhood comparisons. Then I reached the visitor log. Attached were photographs. My photographs. Pictures of my living room. My kitchen. My dining room. Images taken inside the house where I lived. I stared at them in disbelief. I recognized the angle of every room. The placement of every lamp. The floral curtains above my sink. Someone had walked through my home with a camera. Worse, they had done it without my knowledge. As I continued scrolling, another detail emerged. The visit had occurred on a weekend when Ashley and Ethan had offered to help me replace a faulty smoke detector. I remembered that day clearly. They had moved from room to room carrying tools while I worked in the garden outside. At the time, I had felt grateful for their help. Now those memories felt entirely different. My stomach twisted. That evening, Sophie sent another message. It arrived without warning. This time it was not a screenshot. It was a photograph of a laptop screen taken from several feet away. The image was blurry, but one folder name was visible. Property transition. Beneath it sat several files. One appeared to contain financial projections. Another seemed to list potential buyers. I enlarged the image until the pixels blurred together. Then I noticed a date. The folder had been created nearly a year ago. A year. Long before anyone had spoken to me about future plans. Long before anyone had expressed concern about my ability to manage the house. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Everything was beginning to fit together. The missed events. The hidden communications. The discussions about future care. The property evaluation. The photographs. None of these pieces existed separately. They were connected. Part of a larger strategy that had been unfolding quietly for years. A strategy built around decisions I was never supposed to know about. Around midnight, I walked through the house room by room. I touched the banister Robert had installed himself. I ran my fingers across the kitchen counter where we had shared thousands of meals. I paused in the living room where family Christmases had once filled every corner with laughter. For the first time, I realized the house was not simply a house to them. It was an objective. A problem to solve. An asset to manage. And somewhere behind those closed conversations, somebody had already begun. planning for a future that did not include my voice. The day before Thanksgiving, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. I was sitting in my study reviewing the documents I had collected when my phone vibrated with a message from Sophie. There was no greeting. No explanation. Just a single file attachment and 3 words. "You need this." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The file contained several screenshots taken from a conversation I had never been meant to see. Unlike the earlier images, these were clear. Complete. Undeniable. I read the first message slowly. Then I read it again. Someone had written, "We need documentation showing that she is becoming forgetful." Another replied, "Start keeping records of anything unusual she says." My stomach tightened. A third message followed. "If we establish a pattern, the rest becomes much easier." I leaned back in my chair, unable to look away. The conversation continued for pages. There were discussions about missed appointments that never existed. Concerns about confusion that had never happened. Ordinary moments from my life had been rewritten into evidence supporting a story I did not recognize. A story about a woman who could no longer manage her own affairs. A woman who needed others to make decisions for her. Then I reached a message from Ethan. For a moment, I almost stopped reading. Part of me wanted to believe my son had been manipulated. That he had simply gone along with things without understanding. But the words on the screen erased that hope. Ethan had not objected. He had not questioned anything. In fact, he had contributed suggestions of his own. I stared at his name for a long time. The hurt I felt was different from everything that came before. Ashley's actions were painful. Ethan's participation felt personal. Memories flooded back. Teaching him to ride a bicycle. Helping with school projects. Sitting beside hospital beds when he was sick as a child. Spending years trying to give him every opportunity one never had. And now I was reading a conversation where my own son discussed ways to reduce my independence. Another screenshot revealed something even worse. The discussions were not really about care. They were about control. The house. The savings. The future value of my property. Everything eventually led back to finances. Every concern returned to the same destination. By the time I reached the final screenshot, the room felt silent enough to hear my own heartbeat. One message stood alone near the bottom. Ashley had written it months earlier. "Once everything is in place, she will not have much choice." I closed the file and set the phone down. Outside, snow covered the neighborhood in a smooth white blanket. Across the street, Christmas lights had already begun appearing on rooftops. The world looked peaceful. Inside my house, something had changed forever. For weeks, I had been collecting fragments of a mystery. Now the mystery was gone. In its place stood a simple and painful truth. The people I trusted most had spent years building a future on my behalf without ever asking what I wanted. And for the first time since this began, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things. I knew exactly what they were doing. More importantly, I knew they believed I would never find out. I did not confront anyone after reading those screenshots. That was what they expected. If I called Ethan in tears or demanded answers from Ashley, they would know I had discovered the truth. Instead, I did something they never imagined. I stayed quiet. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear. The neighborhood was decorated with wreaths and lights, and the smell of wood smoke drifted through the air. From the outside, everything looked ordinary. Inside, I was making plans. After breakfast, I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, Richard Bennett. He had handled Robert's estate years earlier and knew our family history well. When I arrived at his office, I carried a folder containing every document, screenshot, email, and note I had collected. Richard listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The hidden communications. The property evaluation. The discussions about my mental fitness. The plans being made without my knowledge. When I finished, he sat quietly for several moments before speaking. "Margaret, the most important thing right now is documentation." Fortunately, documentation was exactly what I had. For the next 2 hours, we organized every piece of evidence into a timeline. Dates, messages, property records, school communications. The pattern became impossible to ignore when viewed together. Before I left, Richard recommended something else: an independent cognitive evaluation. At first, the suggestion surprised me. Then I understood. If anyone intended to question my ability to manage my own affairs, objective medical documentation would matter. The following day, I met with a physician who specialized in senior assessments. The appointment lasted nearly 3 hours. Memory exercises, problem-solving tasks, financial reasoning questions, detailed conversations about daily life. By the end, the doctor smiled warmly and assured me that my cognitive health was excellent. A formal report would be available within the week. As I drove home, I felt something I had not experienced in months: confidence. For too long, I had been reacting to events. Now I was preparing for them. Over the next several days, I continued quietly putting my affairs in order. I reviewed my estate documents, updated account security settings, created copies of important records and stored them safely. Every step was calm, deliberate, invisible. Meanwhile, Ashley seemed more attentive than ever. She called twice to check on me. Ethan invited me to dinner. Their concern would have seemed touching if I had not known what was happening behind the scenes. The most difficult part was pretending nothing had changed. Smiling during phone calls, accepting invitations, acting surprised when future plans were mentioned. Yet every conversation revealed something useful. Every interaction confirmed that they still believed I knew nothing. One evening, Sophie sent a brief message. "Are you okay?" I looked at the question for a long time before replying. "Yes. I am getting ready." A minute later, 3 dots appeared on the screen. Then another message arrived. "Good." That single word told me everything. Sophie understood more than she could safely say. As Thanksgiving weekend came to an end, I stood in my living room looking at the family photographs above the fireplace. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer afraid of what might happen next. I had evidence. I had legal guidance. I had medical documentation. Most importantly, I had the truth. And the truth was something nobody in that secret conversation had planned for. Thanksgiving dinner was held at Ethan and Ashley's house that year. By 6 o'clock, the dining room was full of relatives, neighbors, and family friends. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, and holiday music played softly in the background. Anyone walking through the front door would have seen a picture-perfect family gathering. That was exactly what Ashley wanted. I arrived carrying a pumpkin pie and wearing the same calm smile I had practiced for weeks. Ashley greeted me warmly. Ethan hugged me. Several relatives commented on how good I looked. I thanked them politely and took my seat. Throughout dinner, I watched carefully. Ashley moved around the room like a hostess accepting praise. Ethan laughed more than usual. Both of them seemed relaxed, confident, certain that their plans were still hidden. Every now and then, I noticed Sophie watching me from across the table. She never said a word, but she knew what was coming. After dessert, Ashley tapped her glass gently with a spoon. The room quieted. She smiled and announced that before everyone left, she wanted to discuss some family planning matters. My pulse remained steady. This was the moment I had been expecting. Ashley spoke about responsibility, about looking after loved ones, about preparing for the future. Her words sounded caring and reasonable. Several people nodded in agreement. Then she turned toward me. "Margaret, we have been thinking about ways to make life easier for you." The room became very still. Ethan cleared his throat and produced a folder from a nearby table. I recognized it immediately. They were finally ready to move forward. Ashley continued speaking, explaining how much they loved me and how important it was to plan ahead. She never mentioned money directly. She never mentioned property. Everything was wrapped in concern and kindness. When she finished, All eyes turned toward me. I stood slowly. For a brief moment, Ashley looked relieved. She thought I was about to cooperate. Instead, I thanked her for her concern and walked toward the television mounted on the wall. Ethan frowned. Ashley's smile wavered slightly. I connected a small device to the screen and pressed a button. The first image appeared instantly. A screenshot. Then another. Then another. Messages filled the television. Conversations about my house. Discussions about my supposed forgetfulness. Plans that had been made without my knowledge. The room fell silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I watched the expressions around me change one by one. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. Then recognition. Ashley's face lost all color. Ethan stared at the screen as though seeing it for the first time. The messages continued appearing. Dates. Names. Comments. Every piece of evidence carefully organized and impossible to dismiss. Finally, I displayed the medical evaluation confirming my cognitive health. Then the documentation from my attorney. Then the records showing how school communications had been redirected for years. No accusations were necessary. The evidence spoke for itself. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For years, conversations about me had happened behind closed doors. That night, for the first time, the truth stood in the center of the room where everyone could see it. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The only sound in the room came from the television as the final screenshot remained frozen on the screen. Ashley stood motionless beside the dining table. Ethan looked down at the floor. Around them, relatives exchanged uncertain glances, trying to understand how the evening had transformed so quickly. I did not feel angry anymore. The anger had burned away weeks earlier. What remained was clarity. One of Ashley's cousins quietly asked whether the messages were real. Before I could answer, Ashley finally spoke. Her voice trembled slightly as she insisted everything had been taken out of context. She claimed the conversations were about helping me, protecting me, planning for the future. Under different circumstances, some people might have believed her. Unfortunately for Ashley, the evidence had already spoken. Every screenshot included dates. Every document fit into the timeline. Every explanation collapsed beneath the weight of the facts. Ethan attempted to say something next. He started several sentences but never finished any of them. Watching him struggle was strangely painful. This was still my son. The same boy whose hand I once held while crossing busy streets. The same young man whose college tuition Robert and I worked years to afford. Yet standing there that evening, he looked less like a son and more like someone who had spent too long convincing himself that small compromises did not matter. Eventually, Sophie stood up. The movement drew every eye in the room. She looked nervous, but determined. Then she said something nobody expected. She admitted that the first screenshot had not been sent by accident. She had sent it intentionally. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Ashley's eyes widened. Ethan looked stunned. Sophie took a deep breath and continued. She explained how she had discovered the conversations months earlier. At first she thought the discussions were harmless. Then she realized they were becoming more serious. More focused on controlling decisions that belonged to me. She had tried raising concerns privately, but nobody listened. The adults always assured her everything was under control. Eventually, she decided that if nobody would tell me the truth, she would. As she spoke, I felt a wave of emotion stronger than anything I had experienced during the entire ordeal. Not because of the betrayal. Because of the courage. The person who had protected me was not a lawyer, a financial advisor, or another adult family member. It was an 18-year-old girl who refused to stay silent. By the time Sophie finished, several relatives looked visibly uncomfortable. Questions began spreading around the room. Who knew about the plans? How long had the conversations been happening? Why was information hidden from me? The perfect image Ashley had spent years maintaining was beginning to crack. Not through shouting. Not through arguments. Through simple truth. I looked around the room one final time. The fear that had followed me for weeks was gone. The uncertainty was gone too. Everyone now understood what had happened. More importantly, they understood who had made it happen. As the evening slowly unraveled around them, Ashley and Ethan could no longer control the story. For years, they had managed information behind closed doors. That night, those doors finally opened.